Atticus Authors, welcome back to another session of Atticus Authors versus NaNoWriMo 2022. Today is a very special event. I'm about to welcome on two special guests who you have met before if you have joined us in these live events before. I'm going to bring them on right away so you can see who we're talking to today. So welcome, Jason and Felicia. Thank you so much for joining me again. It's so good to have you.
It's really great to be here.
Awesome. So you were both on this live stream a couple weeks ago on a Saturday, but for anyone who didn't watch that event, how about you give yourself a quick introduction, let everyone know who you are, what you write, and why you're here today as an author. So Jason, do you want to start us off?
Sure. My name is Jason Hamilton, and my day job is I work as the content manager of Kindlepreneur. And if you're familiar with Atticus, you probably are familiar with Kindlepreneur. I basically run all of the content that goes through there. And by night, I am a fantasy author, and right now I'm specifically specializing in mythic and Arthurian fantasy. So that's me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for being here. And Felicia, would you like to introduce yourself for anybody who hasn't met you yet?
I am Felicia Wetzig, and I work for the customer support team at Atticus. I am also an author. My cats are fighting. I write mostly romance, a little bit of paranormal, all kinds of romance subgenres, but I've published about 21 books so far, so I'm happy to be here with you all today.
That is amazing. Thank you again for joining us. And if this is anyone's first time here, my name is Monique Danielle. I'm also one of the customer support members at Atticus, and I am an author myself. I have a history in ghostwriting. I've written a lot of nonfiction in the health and wellness space, and I've also written some romance books, and I am currently in the middle of my first ever fantasy young adult fantasy novel. So all three of us here today are self-published, and we have varying degrees and expertises in the self-publishing and writing industry. So if you are joining us live, you are welcome to share any comments or questions you may have for us about writing in specific genres or publishing as an indie author. You can add those to the comment section. If you are joining us live, by all means, introduce yourself as well. We love interacting with our community here. One of the main reasons we're going to be talking today is because recently, Jason and myself were at the 20 Books to 50K conference in Vegas. Unfortunately, Felicia wasn't there with us, but she has a wealth of knowledge that is just as exciting in its own way as to what we learned at the conference. So if you have any specific questions about what may have happened in Vegas, I assure you, if you read the description here for this video, in this particular context, what happened in Vegas will not stay in Vegas. We are happy to share everything we learned there if you have any questions. But I have organized some talking points for our guests because there are some great topics of conversation that I'm looking forward to delving into with you guys. So as I go and work through these questions, anyone watching is welcome to jump in with comments, questions, or your own valuable expertise as well. But to get us started, the idea behind the 20 Books to 50K conference was originally 20 Books to 50K began with the idea that if an author could write 20 books and publish 20 books, that should get them to a full-time income of 50K. That was at the time. For most of us now, that's probably a little bit higher, but the theory is there. Publish 20 books, convert to writing as an author full-time. I'd love to hear your guys' takes on this general theory. Do you think it takes 20 books to make it as a full-time author? More or less, is that a strategy you will adapt for yourself, or just what are your thoughts on that idea in general? Jason, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I think so. I think it's a decent average. I think for some people, they're going to make it to 50K long before they get to 20 books. And for some people, it's going to take more than 20 books to get to 50K. sadly. I know that could be a depressing thought. But I think it's probably a rough, I mean, there's no data on this, obviously, but I'd say it's probably a rough estimate that if you can get to 20 books, you can get around 50K. I'd say that's assuming that you have decent covers on your books, that your books aren't horrible. I mean, they don't have to be the best thing in the world, but just that they're not, terrible. And that you have at least some effort in marketing. Because if you just put 20 books and put them out there and do nothing about it, I don't think you're going to make 50K from that. You got to be doing at least something.
I love that you added that caveat. That's something that we're going to talk more about later on, but I think it is important that everybody understands right off the get-go that we're not in a world of write it and they will read. You have to be doing something to gain those readers. So again, we'll talk about that more as we go through this session. But Felicia, what's your idea on the 20 books goal?
Well, I have 21. I'm not currently making, full-time income just off of my books, but I have in the past. And I think it's something that it really fluctuates, and it's something that you have to stick with it. For me, I went on a long hiatus, and that's the biggest reason. Like, I wasn't marketing, I wasn't writing, I wasn't doing anything for a long time. And that's the biggest reason, I'm sitting at 20 books, but I'm not making a full-time income off of them right now. So there are a lot of factors that come into it. And like he said, you have to do the marketing along with it. You have to wear a lot of hats and take care of a lot of different avenues with those 20 books. It's not really just about writing 20 books and throwing them up. You have to get eyes on them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge takeaway. And I think a lot of new coming authors have that vision of writing one book and turning into a success. And if anything, I don't want to discourage people because that could happen. You never know. But the likelihood is that if you want to make a career as an author, you have to make a career and you have to put in your time. And just like any other industry, you start at the bottom and work your way up. So one of the things at the conference that was really interesting to me is we started with a panel and we ended with a panel. And the two kind of takeaways from that was that it helps to find a lane, and you don't always find your genre in the first book that you've written. It might be the 10th book that you've written. So that can come into play as well, is that in order to find your audience and your success, you have to find a place that fits for you. But then in the final panel of the event, there were authors who made it as a success, getting their full-time income after 3 or 4 books. And then there was someone else who was 50 to 60 books into it before she felt like she was at the full-time income position. And you never know where you're going to fall as an author. So you just got to keep writing and getting those books out there. So with that in mind, so as I mentioned, Felicia, you weren't at the conference, but if you could attend an author session at any conference, and if it was dedicated to what you wanted to learn, what topic would you choose to learn about? What would you want that session to be targeted towards?
What I would need most, I really need to learn more about marketing, and I've done it here and there and dabbled in it and attempted it, but it's just never something that has fully solidified for me. So just to be able to sit in on the building blocks of that, almost the foundational level, because I know stuff kind of all over the pyramid of marketing. It's just putting it all together that I'm still into one core plan. And I need something that I can visualize. I need somebody to do a very visual marketing foundation session. That would be my dream.
Right. Give you a nice step-by-step. Do this 1 to 10. I mean, I would love that as well. But I think as most authors can, and any other business, I think it's probably true that what works for one person may not be the blueprint for everyone. But I think that would be an interesting session as well. Just kind of foundations of marketing. I like that. And if anybody in the audience would like to add their thoughts and answer any of these questions or elaborate on any of the answers, feel free to add those to the comment section as well. So Jason, you were at the conference. So when you got there, was there a particular session you were most looking forward to? And if you saw it, did it meet your expectations?
So going into the conference, there actually was not a specific panel that I was looking forward to. In fact, I'm not sure I even looked at the schedule until I had gotten there. My whole intention when I got there was I want to meet people. I want to meet authors, and because a lot of the sessions are going to be posted online, right? And you can view them, you can get the information. But I found it far more valuable to just be making connections. And Monique, you and I got to meet there, and that was really great. And I got to meet a lot of the other people on the Atticus and Kindlepreneur teams, so that was really good. I can tell you a couple of panels that I did go to that were beneficial, or are we going to talk about that later?
No, dive in. Let us know what you thought.
Okay, so the two that really stuck out to me, there was one by Ilana Johnson, who's I don't know, probably 6-7 figure author. And she did a presentation about creating systems for yourself for writing and for marketing, and how she goes about that. And so she talked about things like tracking your word count and all of the things that are supposed to be really good for improving your productivity. And that's something that I've struggled with in the last couple of years, is getting a consistent word count all the time and all of that. And so yeah, that was one of them. And then another one I went to was by Brian Cohen, who had a panel that was to the effect of like, do more by doing less. And what he meant by that is like, focus your marketing efforts on one or two things. Focus your marketing efforts on one thing, focus your writing efforts on one thing. And so you have one thing in each category. And you pick the thing that is either going to produce the most results for you, or that fits with your personality the best. So if you like creating videos, then doing TikTok or something might be a good thing for you. Or if you like taking photos and images and stuff, then maybe Instagram. If you like writing, which I think a lot of us do, then maybe going into email or blogging or something like that. And if you like people, which I also do, then go into live events instead. So basically this whole concept of like, figure out what makes you excited and really run with that. And so between those two panels, I kind of came away from it saying, okay, I've got one thing to do in writing, and that is I'm going to figure out a system for myself to write more efficiently and more steadily. And then the other thing I'm going to focus on for marketing, my one thing for marketing is going to be email marketing, just because I'm pretty sure everyone says this, and from my own experience, it's also true. Creating your email list is the number one thing you can do. So long and short of it, those two panels really kind of shaped my future going forward. So
I love it. Those both, I didn't attend either of those, so I'm excited for you to share on that. I think they're both great takeaways. Creating a system for yourself to keep yourself productive as a writer, that's obviously one of the most important things you can do. Is you need something to market before you can even get to the marketing point. So I personally have found, I didn't notice this or I didn't learn this necessarily at the conference, but throughout the month of November, anybody who's here probably knows that Felicia and I have been hosting live writing sessions. And personally, I've decided that that is a system that works for me. Not just having a writing sprint, but doing it live, being held accountable by others in the community, and just feeling like I'm a part of that community. So that kind of goes into play with what Jason said about the conference, is that meeting people is such an important part of being an author, whether that's meeting your readers or meeting other people who are in a similar position to you as a writer, because it can be a very lonely business at sometimes. So I like that takeaway. And for your Brian Cohen session there, we actually have a comment from a viewer saying, from Amy, she says, I'd love to know more about audience targeting, specifically on Facebook. I'm not sure that any of us here are authorities on Facebook, but I do believe Brian Cohen has ads courses and such. Do you know, am I on the right track there, Jason?
He has an Amazon ads course. I don't think he has one for
Okay.
Facebook. The only thing I know about Facebook, and I didn't go to any of the panels on Facebook at the event, so it's one of those things. It's on my list to get to eventually, but one thing, right? It's not my one thing right now. But the one thing I do know about Facebook targeting is that a good way to do it is to pick an author that is in the genre that you're in, and target people based on that. And then you can narrow it down further to target only people that also like Amazon Kindle. So you get that cross section of those two things, and you pick the cross section of people that like Amazon Kindle because there's a good chance that those people read ebooks. And so when you direct those people to your ebook, there's a good chance they'll read it. But that's all I know about it, really.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think any of us here are the author or the experts on Facebook. I personally avoid Facebook like the plague. I know that's not necessarily the best decision for my business, but as it is for my mental health. So you have to, like Jason said, pick one thing that works for me. Facebook, it's not the thing that works for me. But if that's what you want to look into, Amy, if anybody who is watching this has any suggestions for Amy that they can share for great courses or people to look into in terms of growing your audience on Facebook, that we would love to hear about that in the comment section if you want to help Amy out on that. But like Jason suggested from his takeaways, focus on the one thing, do as much research as you can, and try to let the other items kind of fall to the background for now. And once you are confident in a specific area, whether it's email marketing or Facebook or whatever it is that you're doing, TikTok, all these things, once you're confident and you have a system, then you can always grow that and move on to the next thing that you're interested in. But hopefully you can find what you're looking for in terms of Facebook marketing, Amy. We've got some more comments from the viewers here. Boyd Craven Jr. says, writing and producing the book is about half the battle. If nobody knows it exists, you won't get the desired monetary results. Marketing is equally important. I agree. And that's a hard truth for a lot of authors who live to write. But if you are self-publishing, and even if you're going traditional these days, marketing is something that you will have to get comfortable with. Crockett Girl 10 says, I agree about the people being the best part of the conference. It's the connections that give strength and accountability. I hated missing this year, canceled at last minute due to death and family. I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope you'll be able to find another conference that you can go to make up for it. There are a lot of amazing events. The 20 Books in Vegas was a huge industry event, but there are smaller ones that happen very regularly. If you just Google them, or even local meetups can sometimes be a great way to meet people in the industry and hopefully find a community that supports you. So hopefully you can make up for that. So thanks for your comments and questions. Keep them coming, guys. But kind of leading on from this, Jason, you've kind of answered it a little bit, but for 2023, is there anything in your author career that you're really wanting to focus on and dive deeper on and improve on? Felicia, do you want to start us off for this one?
Consistency. I really need to work on consistency. And I think part of that is just having the Panther mindset that I'm going to, follow the flow wherever it goes. But I really need consistency across the board. And NaNoWriMo, like you said earlier, it's been really helpful to at least know that there are going to be certain times that I'm going to be sitting down and focusing on writing. So that in itself has been really helpful this month. And I would like to carry some of this consistency over into next year, but I also want to get more consistent across a lot of things. Marketing, I want to start focusing on my email marketing list too, and really keeping at it. That's where I kind of lose it. I will get into a habit for a while, and then life gets in the way, and it takes me so long to get back. But I need to find a system where I'm going to be, at least I can jump back in if I fall off the horse for a while and get right back into where I was. So those are my goals for next year.
I feel that when you said consistency, that hit hard. I'm with you. That's a habit I really need to build myself. And again, NaNoWriMo really helped with that. The community here really helped with that. We have had requests to continue writing streams. So who knows, that may be a thing that helps both of us. Jason, you already did kind of answer this question, but is there anything that you wanted to add? Anything that you're going to be trying to pick up in 2023 to dive deeper in?
Nope. It's pretty much those two things: writing systems to get me writing, consistent as well, and then email marketing is my main focus. Now, it may be that at some point I'll be like, okay, I think email is good. I've got a good system there. I can go and focus on something else now. We'll see.
Nice. Well, like we said, once you feel confident in one thing, you can then add to it and bring another one on. I'm with you guys. Consistency in systems is where it's at. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I am really interested in direct selling, and that'll probably be something I dig deep into, but after I feel like I'm in a good place for email marketing. So
that's cool. That for somebody who likes interacting with people, that's a good way to go about things. Author signings or readings or something like that. More events. That's very exciting. You'll have to keep us all posted on how that goes. We have some more comments from the audience here. Let's see what everybody's saying. Gussie says, my understanding is your next book will sell the other books in your backlist. That is definitely one of the major theories behind the whole 20 books concept. Jason, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's truth to the idea that the best thing you can do to sell your last book is to write the next one. That said, that shouldn't be your only marketing tactic, if that makes sense. Because again, that would be a little bit like just shouting into the void, just be putting out books without doing anything to gain any attention to them. But yes, writing the next book is probably the single most important thing you can be doing.
Felicia, do you have any thoughts on that?
I also agree that foundationally, yeah, that's especially if you're writing series or related books. My first series was interconnected novels, so they didn't have to be read in order, but that really helped because they were all kind of related. And currently I'm kind of in a place where nothing's related, so it does get a little tricky.
Yeah, I can understand that. As a reader, you have to find the first book in a series first, or in a collection, or from an author. You still have to find that first book before you can get to the second book. But knowing that there's a second book, you're more likely to buy then the second and the third and the fourth and everything else the author writes. But you still have to get discovered that first time, whether that's your first book or your 10th book. It still has to be found by your new readers. One of the sessions that I attended at the conference was titled something along the lines of make a full-time income from one book. And I thought it was really interesting at this particular conference because everything I had heard up to that point was write a lot of books and you'll make your author income. So I was really interested to hear what that session was going to be. And it was a really interesting session, so I'm not taking anything away from it, but I did feel it was a little bit of a bait and switch content, because we got there and she basically said, if you want to make an income off of one book, first you have to write successful books that are already making you an income, essentially. Like that's the base of it. And like there was a lot more to it, and it was a really interesting session, but she basically said like your first few books, like you have to develop the income in order to then live off the income that comes in from every successive book, because with each book you publish, that's going to be your primary income earner from there on. So it is still a process, but you can get to the point where one book essentially brings you in an income. But you have to write the books no matter what. And then writing more books is just better and better. So more from the audience. Amy says her goal is 2023 goals, mindset, and learning to use dictation. I see Jason's head nodding over there. Big fan of dictation. Do you want to share any of your best tips?
Yeah, I love dictation. I tried it a couple years ago and was just like, no, this is not for me. And I feel like a lot of people try it and are like, no, this isn't for me, because it feels so foreign at first. But that's the thing. Learning a new skill is always going to feel a little uncomfortable and at first. And in my opinion, like imagine if you didn't know how to type and you had to learn how to type to write your book. That's what it's like learning dictation. Although I'd say it's easier to learn dictation than to learn to type the first time around. So I would say just be patient with it, give it some time. But it absolutely cut my writing time in half once I got in the habit of it. So now I do it pretty much for everything I write, including the articles I write for Kindlepreneur. I'll dictate those, and it's just a really good tool for me. And I know people, and I haven't quite gotten to this point myself, but I know that there are people that will actually start dictating punctuation in real life. They'll just be talking to you, comma, and then they will continue on and on, period.
It's like using text talk in real life.
Yeah. I haven't actually slipped up, but I will say that, speaking the dictation at first was very awkward, and I often missed a lot of it, but now it comes just really easily. So yeah, just give it time, give it patience, and you'll get there. It's just another skill you're learning.
Awesome. Feeding off of that, you mentioned you use it both for your articles on Kindlepreneur and your fiction writing. So one of the takeaways I had from one of the sessions that I was in was that if you're writing nonfiction, you can get away with writing how you speak a little bit easier, because nonfiction is more of a conversation with your readers. Fiction, however, you're telling a story, and you don't tell a story the way you talk. So in your experience, Jason, do you find that you have to go back and do a lot of editing to edit your voice from your speaking voice to your fiction voice, or have you learned how to speak in a fiction voice to start with?
Yeah, great question. I wouldn't say that I spend more time editing my fiction than my nonfiction, but I will say that fiction takes me longer. When I said dictation doubled my speed, I was mostly talking about nonfiction, the articles I write and stuff like that. That stuff, 100% twice as fast as I used to be. But fiction, it's still not quite there yet. And I think as I write, I haven't written as much fiction in the last year since I started dictating as I have nonfiction. So I think that could just be a comfort level thing. But at some point, maybe I'll have a better answer for you about that, because I do spend a lot more time thinking about what I'm going to say when I'm writing fiction. And so my dictation isn't quite as fast because I spend all that time thinking about it. But yes, there is a difference.
Yeah. One of the big things that fiction authors are always encouraged to learn is how to show rather than tell. So even though whether you're dictating or not dictating, Felicia, do you have any tips for fiction authors on getting that voice right so that it doesn't sound, so that you're not writing how you talk, but you're writing more all of the emotions and the body language as I wave my arms everywhere and all of those extra parts of communication. Do you have any tips for authors to get that into your book in a meaningful way?
If I wrote how I normally talk, we would actually have horrible problems. Nobody would know what I was saying. But one trick that I learned, and I don't even remember when or where it was, but it was something along the lines of pretending you're watching a movie. And this is how like my creative process happens anyway. Like I tend to visualize a lot of what's happening, but like if you were a camera sitting on that character's shoulder, how would you know without words what's happening? And that's how I've really trained myself to write in more of a show versus tell way, because if you're a camera, like you're not getting, all you're doing is seeing what they're seeing. You're not having a narrator tell you how somebody else is feeling. You have to pay attention to the body language and the details going on in the scene. It really trains you away from just telling somebody what's happening when you're focusing on giving them the picture of what the camera sees.
I love that. That's such a strong visual to imagine. And it plays into another thing that I had in one of my sessions is an author said similar to that. Like if you're describing other characters, that's how you want to think about it, is you can only see what they're seeing. So you have to describe all of that. But for the main character, you often get the inside view. So in addition, for the main character only, and you can't do this if you're not, unless you are writing an omniscient narrator, but for the main character, you can also include all the feelings and emotions and senses and such. So those are great tips. We are jumping around in the comments a little bit here, but I'll try to make sure I figure everything out. Gussie says newsletter swaps are a good marketing tool. Absolutely. That's a really powerful way to market, especially for kind of newer authors. You can find a group of people who have similar lists to you and just swap back and forth. That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Gussie. Crockett Girl says using a planner helps me with consistency. That definitely works for a lot of people. I am horrible with planners. I find for myself that the moment I write a chore for myself, no matter what it is, everything about me rebels and decides that's the last thing I'm going to do. So it definitely planners help for a lot of people. Do you guys use planners yourself?
I can use one for a couple of months and then I forget it exists. And then I tend to find it around like November or December. And I'm like, oh, look how organized I was for a couple of months.
Right. What about you, Jason?
I don't really use a physical planner. I use a program called Todoist to plan out my week. Just planning out a lot of to-do items for the week.
Mm-hmm. I think that counts
Pretty
as
simple.
a planner.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think finding the right system for each individual person is what needs to happen. Amy asks, does Atticus have a dictation feature? Not currently. It is something our developing team is looking into, and we would love to have in the future. We have had customers share success stories about using Dragon with Atticus. We don't have any internal tests or integration with that, but we've had multiple people say that it works well. And we do hope to have something in the future. Not sure when. Gussie says, I'm a big fan of dictation as well. Crockett Girl also asked, is there a way to dictate to Atticus? I think I just answered that there. Gussie says, I add the emotions and senses in my edits. Yeah, I do that myself. I like to have what happens in the scene, get that written. And then when I'm going out over and doing my edits, I add in all the emotions and senses and character development. For me, that's the most fun part of writing. So if I do it in the editing stage, it makes editing a lot more enjoyable. What about you, Felicia? Do you do all of that in your first draft, or do you go back and have any kind of additional editing for?
kind of a little of both, but for the most part for me it happens in the first draft. Usually my editing draft is more the logic side of my brain has to be engaged, so it doesn't really want to deal with all the emotions and senses. So I really try to have those done in the first round.
So you're kind of the opposite of me.
Yeah, but I like the grammar too, so that's what makes that exciting.
Yeah, again, you got to find what works for you. What about you, Jason? When you are writing in a fiction mindset, do you do it all at once, right? The emotions and the character development while you're writing, or is that something that happens after?
Yeah, I don't really have a good system for editing yet. I think that's something I can be improving in the future. Because I definitely lack a little bit in terms of descriptions and describing the senses and all of that. So maybe yes.
I like it.
But currently, no.
Well, we all have something we need to improve on, right? So it's good to know your strengths and weaknesses. Boyd Craven Jr. says, ideally, one would launch the first book of a series and a corresponding list segment at the same time. In the back matter of book one, provide links for all those who like what you wrote to your list. Okay, I have to go. One would launch the first book in a series and a corresponding list segment at the same time. Do you mean by that, Boyd, that you would have your series completely written before you launch the first one? Or I'm not sure I'm following that.
I think he's talking about email marketing tactics here. So you have in email, you have list segments. And if you have links in the back of your book to sign up for a reader magnet or what have you, that then puts them in a specific segment, then you know that people in that segment know or came from that book. And so it's a great way to target your email list later on, because you know like who your big fans are and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And he did agree it's for email list segmenting. That's a great tip. Thank you for sharing. And it's a great way to build your list and also, like Jason said, keep it organized and know where they came from. So let's see here. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for elaborating and explaining that, Jason. And thank you for the tip, Boyd. That's very fantastic. So I have another topic here. So being as we've kind of jumped around and we've talked about writing and publishing at the same time, but for the next couple of questions, we're going to talk specifically about writing in a very binary sense of the word. Or indie publisher, you have to do both writing and publishing, but they are separate in terms of how you organize your business. So specifically for writing, what is something that you've learned at some point in your life or history or career, author career, about character building that has really stuck with you and you feel has made you a better writer over time? Felicia, do you want to start us out?
Stick me with the tricky one first.
Of course.
Like I'm trying to think of one specific thing that I've learned about character building, because for me it's like I just have these little tiny humans that live in my head. But I think the one, and they kind of do whatever they want to do. But the one thing that I always try to do is make them, I want characters that people are going to love and hate at the same time. So when I'm writing a villain, I want them to be like, you want to hate them, but there's also something that you really kind of like about them. Like that duality to me is very appealing. And I also like having, the main character that everybody is supposed to identify with and enjoy. I also like having something about them that's annoying or like just gets under other people's skin, because like that's real life. There's always going to be something. But But I like having that push and pull of emotions toward different characters and giving them the different sides. So, and it also gives you a lot more room to play with the character because, you know, if they're not always bad, there are so many more avenues they could go down. Saving a puppy at some point that could really just add drama and interest to the story as a whole and draw in interest in the story.
Absolutely. Nobody loves a perfect person, and everybody needs something to get behind on their villain. So that's a great tip. What about you, Jason? What's something about character development that's just stuck with you as a writer?
So I read a lot of epic fantasy, and if you read epic fantasy, chances are you've read The Wheel of Time at some point. And one of the things that I learned from hearing someone talk about The Wheel of Time is that Robert Jordan, the author, was really good at showing the world through the eyes of the character he was writing in that scene. And so, for instance, there's one character who grew up in a fishing village, and and so anytime she would see something, or Robert Jordan would describe something where she's the focus character, she was constantly using like fish analogies or fishing metaphors, and things like that, because that's how she saw the world. And there's one character who's just a real trickster and is constantly making jokes, and so seeing the world through his eyes is so much more entertaining than someone who is less humorous, because there's another character who's a blacksmith and who's very like serious all the time, and I love that character for different reasons, but like the prose that is written about, like, describing the scene is so much more entertaining, I think, for the more trickster character. And so that's something that stuck with me, is like try to describe the world through that person. How do they see it? Not how is it, but how do they see it? And yeah.
I think that's a really, really powerful tip. One of my favorite series is by Kim Harrison, and she has all these different supernatural characters in her book. And you can tell that each of them grew up differently, and they have different needs and requirements and things. But one of her characters is a pixie. And one of his kind of cuss words is Tink's titties. And I just find it absolutely hilarious every time I read it, because it's so specific to what you would imagine a pixie would say, right? Like, it's very like your, like the fish analogies. I think that's really important to have these kind of like special elements for each of your characters. One of the things that I took away from one of the sessions from Vegas was, if you have if you take all the dialogue in your chapter or book or whatever, and you take out all of the he said, she said, and you have no narrative or surrounding it, can you tell without any other indication who said what? And if you can't, you need to develop that character's voice better, because you shouldn't have to rely on your narrative to tell who the character is. Like, the way they speak should be obvious enough. And I thought that was very interesting and quite applies to both of what you guys just said. Yeah, so that was both of you very, very interesting takes on that. We got some more comments on this topic here. Amy says, every character has their own motivations and goals. They're not just there to further the main character's story. They're also the hero in their own eyes. Absolutely. This is true for sub-characters, minor characters, and the villain as well. The villain is always the hero of their own story. So making sure that they have their own motivations and goals really does build the plot in so many ways. That's a great point, Amy. Crockett Girl says, I'm a big D. Kevin Lehman fan and use his birth order book to help me figure out the character. Firstborn, only, a middle, or baby. That will not only help with reaction, but give supporting characters. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to do it, because psychologically speaking, a firstborn, middle child, or eldest child, or youngest child, they develop differently. And they have, like, you ask any of your friends and you'll be able to tell who's the middle child or who's the baby of the family. So it's true for your characters as well. That's really interesting. Another similar technique that I enjoy is going to 16personalities.com and giving all of my characters a personality test. I find that enjoyable as well. Dr. Kevin Lehman. I'm not sure who this is. Oh, I see, doctor. Yeah, I'm not familiar with this person, but thank you for the tip. If anybody wants to go check that out. Zardos56 says, I'm late, but hello. Hello there. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. If you have any questions for our wonderful guest panel, feel free to pop them in the comment section. Love 20 books, lots of great information. That's great. If you were at the conference and have any major takeaways, feel free to share them. We're all excited to learn from each other. The reader should know who is speaking without being told. Yes, absolutely. Very, very powerful point of dialogue. Okay, so moving forward a little bit. Actually, I have a list of questions, but I'm going to skip to a different one that's kind of related. But my question is, do you write villains? And if you do you have any special strategies for making them memorable? So now I know Felicia already said that you like to have a little nugget of goodness in yours so that people can love them as well as hate them. But do you have any other strategies for creating a memorable villain that is actually putting the story forward and useful, I guess, to the narrative? Felicia, do you want to start? I always make you start with these. Sorry. We'll go with Jason next time.
Always with the villains and the characters. It's almost like they live in my head. I love writing villains, though. It's almost the most fun part, and at times is also the most discouraging part, because some of my villains are a bit out there. But I think quite a few bits of it have been said in the conversation before. I like giving them their, that one little thing that kind of makes you want to like them. Like, I could almost like you. And then also keeping in mind that in their mind that they are a hero, although I think that some of mine would be like, they would reject that and just say, no, I'm a villain. I'm a villain in my own story. But they're a little conceited. I like having human villains. I think you really have to keep in mind that there are human motivations behind what they're doing. And it's not always a particularly bad motivation behind what they're doing. It could have been, I don't want to say that somebody was a victim of their circumstances, but there are a lot of circumstances that build into creating a villain. They make the ultimate choices, but I think that showing the path that brought them to where they are can be very powerful to the story and add so many elements to the final battle between the hero and the villain, because not only are you confronting that villain, in this final moment, but you're kind of having to face everything that brought them here. And one other thing that I also like to include is kind of the gray area. Like, even a good person could go bad and become a villain. Like, if you were exposed to these things, how would you have responded? I like showing that, anybody could end on that crooked path if they take a wrong turn. Like, it's not that far removed from our human nature to end up on that path. Of course, it does take a lot of choices, and you do have to make a lot of obvious concessions to get there, but they're not so different.
Right. I love that. I think that's really important. And one of the things that I do that, how I would answer this question is to drip the backstory along. As with anything, you don't want to info dump. So when you're giving the story behind what made your villain the way they are, I like to pepper that throughout the book so that you have moments where they're just this evil, terrible person. And then you're like, oh, but that happened. Oh, okay, I'll forgive you. And you have those kind of like ups and downs, like with the rest of the action. So building on what you said would have been my answer. Now, Jason, you write mythic fantasy. So a lot of your characters, good and bad, are based on myths that already exist. So how do you write villains that you can put your own spin on them?
Yeah, so this is maybe not a good question for me because most of my villains so far have been very like Dark Lord-esque, very evil to their core kind of villains. And I think there's definitely something to be said for having sympathetic villains. Sorry, I have a visitor.
Well, hello. Everybody say hi.
Say hi.
What a cutie.
So yeah, there's definitely something to be said for sympathetic villains and for having like a little bit of good or villains that think they're doing the right thing, that sort of thing. But I'm not necessarily ashamed of having the sort of evil to their core Dark Lord type villains, because I think there is something uniquely scary about a person who is just evil. And you can't necessarily trace a motivation or tragic backstory to it. They just are evil. I think there is room for that type of villain as well. And so, I have more villains I plan on doing that are actually based in real world mythologies and that sort of thing. And a lot of those, I will make them more sympathetic villains. Sorry, I have to like manage this girl. But I just wanted to point that out, that I think there's something especially scary about that type of villain.
I think it's a really interesting take, and the genre you're writing is really going to influence that decision. And the more mythic inspired genres were often used as like morality tales, and it was, you have an evil and you have good, and this is how you deal with it. So those kind of inspired genres really allow for just evil for the sake of evil a lot more than, say, a contemporary modern novel. You can't get away with that in the same way. So it's important to know your genre as well. That's a really great takeaway. My name is Chris. Okay, so sorry with your username. Thank you for letting us know, Chris. Chris says, my villains did not know they were evil. They thought they were doing good. And that's exactly what we're saying, was that for the most part, villains are the heroes of their own story. And even if they're kind of like, I've decided to be an anti-hero because I don't like what the heroes are doing, they're still doing whatever it is because they think it's right. So they're doing the right thing according to their own story. So I think that's an interesting take as well. Crockett Girl says, because I write in the Christian niche, often villains were expected to have a redemptive moment, but not all fit that. So I often let them suffer their consequences. And that's a great point as well, is that some villains can be redeemed. And maybe if you're writing a series, they have a new arc in a future book. But no matter how your story goes, all of your characters follow an arc. They have a conflict, and at the end it's resolved. Resolving a conflict doesn't always mean positive outcomes. Sometimes they're suffering consequences, and that's the reality of life. So I think that's a really great comment as well. Chris says, doing bad things for the right reasons. Absolutely, or at least the right reasons according to that particular character. I mean, your protagonists and main characters are doing the right things according to them as well. Authors just tend to write assuming that more people agree with their main character's motivations. Boyd says it's always interesting if your protagonist wants the same thing as your antagonist. That doesn't always work, and the antagonist doesn't exactly have to be evil, maybe just the opponent. Absolutely.
A good example of that is the first Black Panther movie. If you saw that, the main villain of that is one of the best villains in all of the MCU. Granted, that's a little bit of a low bar, but nothing against the MCU villains, but there's like two that are really good. That character played by Michael B. Jordan, I think, really awesome villain and a great example of the goals being the same, but the methods being different.
Absolutely. And it's also important to note that not all genres have place for a villain. They're simply opposing conflict. So it's not always a bad person. It's just like you said, somebody who wants the same thing as you, and it's competition.
It could also be, man versus nature or
Mhm.
technology, or there are a whole bunch of antagonists that aren't necessarily people.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Jaws or Twister or something like that. There's a force of nature, like you said, that you can't. It's nature in itself is not inherently evil or villainous. It's just opposing what you want to do with your life. So, very great point. Gussie says there's a surprising number of evil people in the world.
Oh.
Absolutely, and I mean those people, depending on your perspective. Philosophies were built on this. Is that did they start off evil and just keep going, or did bad things happen that turned them the way they are? And that's there are different ways to look at that.
There's a lot of literature on that subject.
Yeah. One of the primary subjects of philosophy as a study. Chris says, my first bad guy was only trying to warn the world about long-term dangers of nuclear power plants. He got corrupted by an evil staff. Sounds very intriguing. And you elaborated here, your urban fantasy sci-fi. Well, it sounds very interesting. Welcome, William. It's nice to see you. In your current work of progress, my antagonists think they're gathering information about a threat to their kingdom. So again, another really great example of your antagonist or villain or the opposing force thinking that they're doing the right thing. And it may be the right thing for them. It's just not the right thing for everyone. So great conversation on that subject. I love it. We have been on for almost an hour so far. So I think we should maybe move on to kind of the publishing side of things and get some of that information out there. So we're all three of us here are self-published indie authors. And one of the interesting takeaways from the Vegas conference that I had was that traditional publishers, their goal is to take your book and put it on a shelf in a bookstore or a library. And that shelf has a label on it. It might be fantasy, it might be horror, it might be romance, but there's only one label on that shelf. And that's the goal of a traditionally published book. As an indie author, we're given the opportunity to put our book in fantasy, dark fantasy romance, and you can have all of these elements in your book and still get it found and appeal to multiple audiences. So as an author, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, this applies to everyone, but how do you choose your main focus genre and then add subgenres into that if you do so? Jason, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I don't really have a strategy behind it. I just kind of go with what interests me. And I picked mythic fiction as my main thing, mostly because there was so much that I could do with it. And I was pretty sure I wouldn't tire of writing those books for a while. But I do have other interests as well. I have a series I want to do that's heavily based on old pulp fiction, pulp magazine fiction. So things like Doc Savage and The Shadow and Tarzan and all of these old characters mixed with a little bit of H.P. Lovecraft. Totally different from the mythic fiction that I write, but it would, it's something I will probably do at some point, but we'll see.
So you're,
I'm governed very largely by what I'm interested in.
I think that's a really important thing to do as a writer, because if you don't love what you're writing, chances are your interest will fizzle out. So that's important. Felicia, I know your books have multiple genres and subgenres. So how do you work that out with your publishing goals?
I have a knack for just mixing genres in weird ways for the most part. I don't really set out with the main genre and subgenre in mind, which makes marketing difficult in the later steps, I admit. But I really just kind of go where my imagination takes me, and then I try to figure out where it fits. Fortunately, as self-published authors, we have kind of more choices. There are more things to choose from rather than just, you got to fit with the standard tropes of romance to get on this shelf, or you got to fit with the standard tropes of paranormal to fit on this shelf. Fortunately, we have a lot more leeway in that area. But I have had to kind of just pick the ones that are kind of close enough when I go to categorize my books. I know with my first big romance series, I've started to call it survival romance, which is not a genre, but that's about the only thing that I can think of that really fits with what's going on. So that's my survival romance series. And if I were traditionally published, where would they stick that?
That's very interesting, though. And I think a great strategy, especially you've made it very obvious you're a pantser and you like to write where your books take you. So finding out where they fit afterwards is something that any author can do. I've done similar things where I've written something and then tried to fill it into the appropriate slots. My current young adult fantasy book, I knew I wanted to write fantasy. I decided young adult because I felt like that was safer. Fantasy readers can be extremely picky and critical, and I felt that young adults would be a little bit more gentle. So I went with that. But then when I was writing, when I was planning it all out, I jumped into Plotter. I've mentioned it many times. It's my plotting tool of choice. And there's no clear fantasy plot line. So I was like, uh-oh, I need a clear outline for myself. And I thought back about writing, and just about every fantasy book I've ever read has that action adventure feel to it. So that's the plot that I went with. And now with that idea, I'm purposefully building action and adventure into my fantasy that would have been there regardless. But now I'm more conscious of hitting those points and making sure it's developed like that. So I'm consciously writing that into my book, and then I'm using my subplots to decide what kind of subgenres are going to be in there, such as social issues that are popular in the young adult space and sort of things like that. When I was writing nonfiction, I often decided what I was going to write based on the category that I wanted to be put into. And I use Rocket for this. I think all of us are familiar with Publisher Rocket. But when I found a category that I both thought I had potential to rank in and also that I was somewhat interested in, I would then write a nonfiction book on that topic. So I've kind of gone both ways. And we've got a few more comments here. Chris says, please post this video later so we can watch the entire thing. Absolutely. This will be live in the replay. Anybody who wants to start from the beginning, you absolutely can. As soon as it's over, it will take a few minutes to render, and then it will be on our Atticus YouTube channel. And if anybody is catching this in the replay, just so you know, you can write in the comment section. I will be in there answering questions, and things can always be addressed in a future live as well. So make sure you join in the conversation there. Chris says, what about running ads? I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. I'm going to get through some of the other questions or comments based on the topic we were just talking about, and then we can go back to ads. What works for you or doesn't work. That's what I struggle with. Yeah, a lot of that is just kind of figuring yourself out as as a writer, something that we all have to do on a personal level. Crockett Girl says, I started out writing historical romance, but I've honed my niche to 1955 to 1975. Also have some split times that actually sell better, but aren't my favorite. That's a tricky place to be in because, again, if you're not writing what you're passionate and what you love, it can be a lot harder to get that book written. But sometimes you have to do what sells as well. So hopefully you can find a happy balance where you get the best of both worlds. I write what I know best, magic and science. That's a great way to go. I like it. Crockett Girl says, I get survival romance. I'm trying to carve a niche called retro historical romance. Has rom-com feel, but set in the mid-20th century small town. I love the idea of creating your own genres. I do think from a sales and marketing perspective, making sure that you have something that ties you into what readers are already buying is important for your own success as an author, but then taking that and giving it your own spin is a great way to make a name for yourself. Magic equals ESP. I love Atticus. It doubled my daily word output. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I'm so glad to hear that. Ramsey Sparrow says, Monique, thank you for putting this together, and thank you all for sharing your experience and wisdom. Well, you're very welcome. I'm so excited to host this. It's always a great time. And yeah, thank you very much, Jason and Felicia, for joining. I don't think we're quite done yet, though. So Boyd says, survival romance is definitely a thing. We're big into disaster fiction. There's a Christian segment to that, as well as a romance segment. Branding your covers draws them together. So that's a great tip. Thank you, Boyd. And it's nice to know that there are people out there searching for what Felicia's writing. It's good stuff. So moving on a little bit more. Well, since Atticus was brought up, let's do this one. So all of us work in some measure with Atticus, which is a book formatting and writing software. Writing your book is obviously the first thing that you have to do, but formatting it for publication is a very huge thing that a lot of authors pay a lot of money to hire out. Atticus offers indie authors the opportunity to do it for themselves. So what are your guys's favorite kind of formatting tips that can help authors improve their potential for success, but something that has to do with the formatting of a book? Jason, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would say, thinking of Atticus specifically, play around with the full bleed images and incorporating that into your character or into your chapter themes, because you can create some really pretty and really creative chapter themes that way. And they can be different images. So I've heard of some where people have like a tree that's each chapter it's growing a little bit more off to the side, starting out as a little seed, and then by the end of the book, in the last chapter, it's a full tree. Stuff like that, I think, is stuff we don't see a lot of right now, and so authors could really make their books stand out with that sort of thing, I think.
I love that. And you don't have to be a professional designer in order to do these because, yeah, like you said, Atticus really makes it a lot easier. What do you think, Felicia? What's something that authors can do in their formatting to increase their chances for success?
I think the most important thing is focus on adding, a visual element that complements the story without... You don't want to tip that balance too much into there's too much focus on the visuals or too much focus on the formatting that it detracts from the words. So you really got to find that visual balance between the image that complements your story and letting the readers focus on the words on the page.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
It's easy to go overboard and try to nail down like every single detail and fill up all the white space and you know, you could just keep going forever, but your main focus still has to be on just keeping the reader reading.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, as easy as it may be with Atticus, that doesn't mean you have to throw everything in there all at once. I like that. For me, one of the things that I like is one of the newest features available in Atticus, and I took a session on this in Vegas, and there's so much potential behind it, and that's the new universal book link feature. So if you're publishing just on Amazon, this maybe isn't as important for you, but if you are publishing to multiple networks, so say you also want to put your book for sale on Barnes and Noble and Kobo and all of these other places, what authors have done to this point is usually they either have to create separate versions of their book, because you can't have a link to your book for sale for Kobo in a book that you publish on Amazon. Like, that's the sure way to get your book pulled from the shelf, and vice versa. You can't have Amazon links when you're selling to Barnes and Noble. So one of the ways to work around this is to have a universal book link. And Atticus now has this feature built in where you can just link a general buy my books here kind of link, and it will use book linkers capabilities to create a bridge page for you, where there you have all your books for sale in all of the different locations. So your readers can buy your future books or your other books however they prefer. So I think that's a really great way to get more books, more opportunities out there, is to use that book linking feature. That's one of I think it's very, very neat. And if you're using go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that, because I've been using universal book links for a while. The other benefit, like, even if you are posting, or even if you are just publishing to Amazon, they can be really handy, because if 6 months down the line or a year down the line you decide to change that, you can just change it on the back side with your universal book link, and you don't actually have to update your back matter or your links all over the place. You can just roll with it and keep that single link in all of your books, no matter where you're publishing. As someone who's kind of changed things around a few times, it's been so beneficial to know that all of my links still work. It doesn't matter that I've changed where I'm publishing. All of my old links still work.
That's a really great point. Thank you for reminding us of that. And then another thing is, even if you're only publishing on Amazon itself, if you're using affiliate links, if you're using their associates program to sell your other books, you can get really great tracking information using something like book linkers. So you can keep track of stats and stuff like that as well. I'm not an expert on it, but the session is definitely something that piqued my interest, and now I want to look into more. Okay, so we've got a few comments here. Chris says, I've only had a problem with the print title page. It looks great in ebook, but for whatever reason, the print title page comes out offset, and I've tried full bleed and every which way. Do you mean the automatically generated title page in Atticus? Or if you've done it full bleed, I'm guessing that you are using your own image. If you've set it to full bleed with your own image, you have to be sure that it's the exact right size that includes bleed as well. If you are having trouble with this, you can just email support@atticus.io and we can help you with that for sure. Crockett Girl says, keep Monique on speed email. LOL. Actually, the customer service for Atticus is amazing. Can't say enough good about it. Well, thank you so much. We've all said this. I think that everyone working on the team is authors ourselves, so we understand what it's like. And generally, you write into support when you're having a panic moment. So we understand, and we definitely want to help get you over that. My cover designer does separate title pages and we can't figure it out. It seems adding a full page image doesn't translate to the print version. Any thoughts? Full page images are specifically designed for the print version of your book. So I'm guessing the issue here is probably a bleed setting. So if you are publishing a 6x9 book, you can't necessarily make your image exactly 6 by 9 inches, you also have to add on the bleed settings. We do have a tutorial for that. If you go to atticus.io/tutorials, you can see there's a tutorial for finding the right image size. So hopefully that helps you out. Amy says, I really appreciate that you created the duplicate theme feature. I can use one template for a series and make minor changes to it for a spin-off series. My newest series is using my custom Atticus theme, and I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah, the duplicate feature really, really helps if you're making, like you said, small adjustments. We have more exciting things coming for the theme, which I won't talk about now, but coming soon, new developments all the time. Chris says, I use reader links now called the Author Helper Suite. It creates universal book links. That's amazing. Yeah, that's a great resource as well. Thank you for sharing. Added image title page. Yeah, that's what I thought. And thanks for the info, and customer service is awesome. Well, thank you. We try. So I'm going to try to keep this to an hour and a half. So I'm going to get one more, maybe two more questions. I have two good ones that I want to talk about. One of them we mentioned right at the very start. One of Jason's first answers talked about this, but I want to know your thoughts on how important is a book's cover, and what are your best tips for maximizing this element of your book? Now, Jason does some really, really fun stuff with AI art. So if you want to talk about any of that in relation to your book cover, by all means do. But Jason, what do you think about a book's cover? Where's the importance level for you?
Oh, it's high, very, very high. I was saying that email is your most important thing, and it is. But in terms of getting your book to sell and reducing the friction between people between selling your book to potential buyers, it's hugely important. Not only does it need to be good and professional looking, but it needs to match the genre. One of the series that I published, I've since unpublished it, but I had some covers on them that looked amazing. They were beautiful, exactly what I wanted, but they were not the right look for the type of book I was trying to sell, and it was so hard. No amount of ads are going to work on a book like that. Somebody had asked about ads earlier. That's one of the things you got to make sure you got down first, is you got a good book, because if the book cover does not look great, doesn't matter how efficient your ads are, they're not going to convert. So yeah, big deal.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And as hard as it is for an author to get criticism from an editor, it's similar with a book cover, because you may have a vision in your head of exactly what you want your book cover to look like. But if it doesn't match what readers' expectations are for that genre, it doesn't matter how beautiful it is. If a reader can't immediately look at it and say, yes, this is the type of book I read, I want that one, like Jason said, you'll have an exponentially harder time selling that book. What about you, Felicia? Do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's hard to add to that. Just to reiterate, the market research and knowing what's popular in your genre. It's really painful when you have a beautiful cover that you love, but it's not going to sell your books. But your cover, especially when you're just starting out or your first several books, you really it has to scream whatever genre you're writing in. And if a reader looks at it and it's supposed to be a contemporary romance and they think it looks a little paranormal, that could be all the reason they need not to pick it up. So the market research for book covers is so important.
And it is like minuscule, like the difference between, like, there's like 5 different types of paranormal romance that you could do, and there are subtle differences in the types of covers for each one. You need to know exactly what books are exactly like yours, or as close to yours as possible, and then look at those covers and identify the similarities, and maybe even send some examples to your cover designer and say, I want something like this. There's a series I'm planning in the near future, that it's kind of a really niche genre. It's the young adult medieval academy fantasy. So it's not academy fantasy, because that is something totally different. It is medieval academy fantasy. And I've done my market research on this one, and I know exactly like 2 or 3 series that are very close to the series I want to write. And so, and I can tell that there are some subtle differences in that compared to other medieval young adult fantasy. There are specific things that the cover is hitting. And so I've already commissioned one of the covers for that. And when I did that, I basically took the covers from these 2 or 3 series that I knew were in the exact same genre, and I said, make me something just like this. And that's how you do it.
I like that. And so I spent many years as a professional book cover designer. And one of the things that you've said a couple times, Jason, is you encourage people to hire someone, get a book designer, even though that's something that I used to do myself. And it is completely possible for indie authors to design their own book covers. If you are very close to your book and have an image in your head about what you want the cover to look like before you do your market research, I really encourage you to hire this out, because it will be that much harder for you to be impartial and unbiased about how your cover looks. And it's a really important part of the process. So I don't even design my own book covers, even though I used to do that professionally, because I know I'm too close to my book itself and I can't be unbiased. So it is a good thing. Now, if you have gone and done your research and you know exactly what your cover should look like, there are tools out there to help you as an indie author design your own book cover. And it is something that you can do yourself if you don't have the funds to do it. Things like even Canva or BookBrush, they're potential sources, but you really, really, really have to be unbiased and know what you're designing before you even try it at all. So Chris says first cover, second paragraph. I'm assuming that, like, in terms of importance, that's what you mean. People do judge books by their covers. Absolutely. That's how you get them to buy it. But then, like you said, the first paragraph is what hooks them into reading it. And quite often that's available, especially on platforms like Amazon. They can do the look inside. You got to hook them before they even buy. Crack It Girl says cover is the first impression, and you know what they say about that. Yeah, exactly. Last book sells the next book. Absolutely. That's true very often. My cover tells the story. Boyd says, Jason got it. Covers are huge, but the cover on book 1 in the series is vastly more important than the rest. If they loved book 1, they'll follow your link in the back matter to book 2 regardless. Absolutely. And also another thing to keep in mind when you're doing that research is to find books that are publishing now. If you are comparing your book to a book that was designed a decade ago, even if that book is still selling really well, it got its momentum a decade ago, and things are different now. So if you're just getting momentum now, you have to build a cover based on what is selling right now. Chris asks if, can I share my first cover or not? I don't think that's even possible on YouTube, to be honest. It's almost always like DIY. Yeah, absolutely. So great stuff about cover design. I did say earlier that we were going to go back to ads. I'm not sure we'll have time for that, but I want to throw this out there. Dave Chesson of Kindlepreneur does have a free ads course. If anybody wants to learn more about creating ads on Amazon for their books, you can go to amscourse.com. Let's put that. Course.com. And you can register for his free course there. So if you want to learn more about ads, I don't think we'll get to talking about that today, but you can go amscourse.com and hopefully that will help. The other topic I wanted to talk about, if you guys have a few more minutes, is audiobooks. This was a huge feature at the Vegas conference, and I would love to know is this something you have done already, or is it something that you are planning to do in the future? And what is your thoughts on the audiobook industry as a whole? Jason, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I didn't really go to any of the audiobook panels at this one. I know they're important because audiobook is taking off. There's a lot of growth there. But I think I had a bad experience with audiobooks. I'll say this. Um, and there's a word of warning here. So back when I was launching this series that did not take off, that I told you that had the wrong covers, I had heard that it was important to simultaneously publish an audiobook with your ebook because that would actually strengthen the amount of sales you had. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this right. And I thankfully had access to some funds that allowed me to pay a really good narrator to narrate my first book in that series. And I said, okay, we're going to publish this around the same time as the ebook and see how it goes. And the ebook didn't take off, and so naturally the audiobook didn't take off, and I actually lost quite a bit of money on that endeavor. And so some of the advice that I hear about audiobooks that I think is very important is you don't have to publish it at the same time as your ebook. And I would make sure you have some guarantee that your ebook is going to sell or is already selling before you publish an audiobook, because if people aren't going to buy the ebook, there's a good chance they're not going to buy the audiobook either. In fact, that's almost a certainty. So wait until your ebooks are doing well. And then maybe at some point, if you've got a good rhythm going with your books, and you know just from your experience and how well your other books have done that you're likely to sell those books well, then maybe you can start producing your audiobooks at the same time. But I would say if your ebooks are not, or your paperbacks are not making a lot of money, don't worry about it yet. Just worry about getting those ebooks selling.
Okay, good tips. What about you, Felicia? What are your thoughts on audiobooks?
They are a big investment. So basically building off of what he just said, you really want to make sure you have the foundation in place to be able to afford both the cost of your narrator and production and the time you're also going to have to promote. That's going to be another asset that you're going to have to promote. So it's going to take another big chunk out of everything. But it's one of those things that right up front there, you're going to have to pay a pretty good chunk to pay for it to be narrated and produced. So you have to be in a place where you're prepared to do that. And I definitely would not recommend doing it until you have at least a solid foundation built. I have a couple of audiobooks that kind of came along by luck. And one of them was produced by one of my publishers. So that was through the Limey Bat, or through the Cocky Hero world with Penelope Ward and V. Keeland. So they had that one produced. So I'm fortunate to have some good ebook or audiobooks out there, but it's not something that I could feasibly maintain long-term doing every book.
Mm-hmm. Great tips. And before anybody out there says, oh, you can do the profit share system on Audible's publishing platform, you can. But before you consider doing something like that, my biggest tip for audiobooks is to listen to a lot of them before you commit to doing one yourself, because there's such a huge variety. There's currently a low barrier to entry for publishing an audiobook, which can be a great thing. It can mean that you have a huge opportunity to get in at the still almost ground floor, but it also means quality is variable. So listen to a ton of audiobooks before you decide what you're going to do. And generally the better quality ones are ones that have cost, like both Jason and Felicia said, they've cost the author quite a bit to produce it, and it makes a big difference. Fiction can also be really difficult to create an audiobook out of. It can be a really hit or miss experience. So you want to be sure if you're doing one, it's something that you can be really, really proud of. If you have a huge author platform, that may be a great place to start. But if you're just starting out, it can be a lot harder for you. Now, one of the comments I'm seeing here in this section is some authors make more money with their audiobooks when they put them on YouTube. So that's an interesting take as well. It's not just Audible that gives you the platform to write or to produce audiobooks. While it may be the biggest player in the industry right now, there's also Findaway Voices, and there are a lot of authors who put their books on YouTube, and instead of making money off of a single sale, they monetize their YouTube channel, and it's definitely a way to consider it. There's lots of trainings out there. It's a really interesting topic if anybody wants to continue looking into it. There are a few more comments on here. Boyd is asking if anybody has done that, put their audio on YouTube rather than Audible. And if anybody has any personal experiences, please do add it to the comment section and let everyone know. Quickly, we are at the hour-and-a-half point here, but there's one more comment that I would love Jason specifically to address. Crockett Girl says, my friends who attended 20 books are all now talking about AI. They're not the only ones. Jason, what do you think?
So I think we should have another streaming session so I can talk specifically on this topic, because I need a good solid 15 minutes just to talk about this. But the short answer is yes, it is huge right now. The capabilities of image AI is at a place where it never has been before, and it's finally at that place where it looks professional, and in many cases you can't even tell that it was AI generated. And I'm talking specifically about images. There's a lot of growth in other areas as well, like AI writing tools. I've been experimenting with those lately, and they're not quite at the point yet where I would say this is a game changer, but I have no doubt that within 5 years it will be. So we want to be keeping an eye on that. And then also AI audio is another thing that's not quite there yet, but I have no doubt it will be eventually. Yeah, Boyd mentioned AI audio, but images are, in my opinion, pretty much there. There's still always room for improvement, but AI images are incredible right now. And there's a lot of lingering legal questions about AI, and so proceed with caution. Currently, I've done a lot of research into what the legal situation is currently with AI images, and you can use them in your books as of right now. But there may be lawsuits, there may be other things that come into play. You want to be very careful that your image is not a whole lot like something that is copyrighted, because you might be opening yourself up. But as long as they are sufficiently modified and not obviously, if you produce an image about Batman or something, don't use that. You don't have the copyright for Batman, even though the image itself would be original. But if you want to use it for other things that are not commercial, which I think is the greatest area where authors can use AI art, you can absolutely knock yourself out. A great way to do this is to produce images that are like concept art of your characters or locations and things like that. It's really easy to do now with AI art. I was showing Monique a couple of things at the 20 Books conference, and she, at one point, I just pulled out my phone and said, "Give me a prompt," and she gave me this character from her series, and I just put it in, and it popped something out, and she's like, "Oh, that right there, that's it." So yeah, there's a lot of really cool things you can do there, if only to give yourself a visual reference image, or to have something neat to share with your email newsletter or social media. All of that, I think it's really a great tool right now for that.
Absolutely. And yeah, after Jason showed me the art, I am in. It is really, really cool stuff. Now, Crockett Girl did say that they were specifically talking about AI audio, which has come leaps and bounds over even the last like 6 months to a year. You can get some really amazing AI audio. As far as I understand, you're still limited to what you can do with it. I believe Audible does not allow you to produce audiobook using AI audio. But if you do want to try putting your narrated books on YouTube, that is definitely a great way to try it out if you aren't comfortable doing it yourself and don't have the funds to hire a professional narrator. It is not perfect. It does sound very good compared to maybe what you were hearing 5 years ago, but it's not 100% human intonation. So you have to decide what your opinions on that are and how close to the narrative you need it to be. But definitely AI is in all different aspects somewhere to stay on top of the research and see what's happening in the industry. So so I think it's time to wrap up here. Thank you so much for coming on and being with us. Jason and Felicia, do you guys have any last words that you want to leave our viewers with? Felicia, do you want to start?
I'm going to go with my usual, which is keep writing, keep creating. As long as we all keep rowing, we're all gonna make it to our destination. And this month has just been a fantastic month to get to know the community. I'm so glad that I've been able to do NaNoWriMo with Monique and all of you. And I really hope that we do find something that we can regularly do along this line to kind of give ourselves some accountability and also continue encouraging and being a part of the community, because it's been fantastic, and I really encourage you all to keep going.
Thank you. And what about you, Jason? Any final thoughts you'd like to leave our viewers with?
I think that pretty much sums it up. I'll just say, go write. Stop listening to us.
Yeah, stop listening to us. I agree. I think everybody should keep on writing. My tip, however, is also going to be keep on learning. I think that that's a part of growth, and we all need to continue to grow and learn and do better. And that's what I think we're all doing here together. So thank you very much, Jason and Felicia, for being here and sharing your amazing wisdom with everyone. And thank you, everyone who is watching us live and everyone who is going to be watching this in the replay. We really appreciate your participation and viewership. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more, we are definitely open to the potential. But to let us know, give the video a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you want to see more videos like this and join in some live writing sprints and learn more about Atticus as a whole, also click the bell so that you receive notifications whenever there's a new video going live. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. We really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best with your writing and formatting and publishing and all the good authorly things. Have a wonderful day, everyone.